Hey, it's Brett, and this is Brett and Some Books. Today we are reading The Anarchy Police, Militant Anti-Fascism as Alternative Policing Practice by Stanislav Vyotsky. Abstract. Anarchist criminology has produced a strong critique for the system of criminal law, but has only recently started to theorize practical alternatives. The alternatives that it offers have been largely rooted in pacifism through the practice of restorative justice and de-escalation of conflict. These models are generally effective so long as the individuals involved are committed to the process being applied. Ethnographic study of the anti-fascist movement in the United States demonstrates a potential model of anarchist response to threats of community and public safety as in prefigurative subcultural spaces. The confrontational and violent tactics employed by militant anti-fascists serve as a form of policing based on anarchist principles of spontaneity, direct democracy, and direct action, and we can serve as a starting point for theorizing proactive anarchist actions against individuals who threaten public safety and order. Introduction. Anarchist criminology has traditionally advocated alternatives rooted in pacifist visions of restorative justice to existing systems of criminal justice. These restorative practices often, quote, aim at the good of all, freedom and justice for all, solidarity and love among the people, end quote, Malatesta. Restorative justice methods, however, are often only applied after crimes and other violations of social community norms have occurred in order to bring a sense of peace and justice to the aggrieved, the community, and the perpetrator. In this respect, restorative justice presents only part of the anarchist answer to the question of how to address crime without reliance on the system of criminal law. Anarchism has produced very few models for how to prevent or address crime when it is occurring because such responses often involve the exertion of force or the power that is antithetical to anarchist principles. Yet, anarchism is also driven by a belief in direct action and developing prefigurative models of future institutions in a post-revolutionary society. Militant opposition to fascist organizing may serve as a model for proactive and preventative anarchist responses to threats of social order and safety. Direct, often violent, opposition to the fascist movement presents a unique challenge to criminologists. Often, such opposition is understood in popular discourse as gang violence, which places it under the purview of the state. For mainstream criminology, the understanding of such actions becomes similar to that of any other form of gang activity because the violence takes place within and between subcultures and social spaces. Criminologists and social justice professionals see a violent clash involving members of the punk and or skinhead subcultures as a product of internal conflicts over subcultural dominance and control of social space. Blazek, 2001. Such actions may also be interpreted as acts of vigilantism because they involve the extra-legal use of violence in order to admittedly maintain the social order of the subculture within which these conflicts take place. The research presented in this article will demonstrate that such actions are in fact an attempt to maintain order within the subculture and its social spaces, as well as the safety of participants. The militant approach to anti-fascism presents a unique form of anarchist practice and makes a distinct contribution to anarchist criminology by incorporating a form of direct action against a collective threat represented by individual fascists. By directly acting against fascists, militant anti-fascists express the anarchist values of direct action and non-state action. In this sense, militant anti-fascist violence among subcultural participants acts as a form of anarchist policing of the prefigurative spaces that these subcultures represent because it 1. reflects a disdain for civil society and the state. 2. Involves direct action. And 3. Presents an alternative to state action. This anarchist, direct action approach also represents a crucial contribution to the field of critical criminology because it embodies a radical, proactive approach to resolving issues of social order within subcultural communities that often wish to remain outside of both the purview and restrictions of the law and its state. Such practices may serve as a starting point for a broader discussion regarding the alternative practices to current modes of policing. This article develops an anarchist approach to policing by first outlining the basic principles of anarchism and its understanding of the practices of social control. Then, as the case examples are contextualized through a discussion of the practices of contemporary fascism and anti fascism as they are manifest in subcultural participation in the punk scene. Such activity is linked to anarchist practice by understanding it as a form of prefigurative political practice typical of new social movements. After establishing the concepts used to understand militant anti fascism as a form of anarchist praxis, I briefly outline the process of data collection, followed by case examples of anti fascist actions as forms of policing action. The article concludes by discussing the processes that ground militant anti fascist processes as forms of anarchist social control, as described above. Anarchism and anarchist criminology. Anarchism developed as a distinct strand of socialism in the 19th century. Contemporary anarchism has splintered into a diversity of branches that are based on a variety of historical circumstances and philosophical influences. Nonetheless, the core of the theory has not changed since its early theoretical articulations. Anarchism, the name given to a principle or theory of life and conduct under which society is conceived without government. Harmony in such a society being obtained not by submission to law or by obedience to any authority, but by free agreements concluded between the various groups, territorial and professional, freely constituted for the sake of production and consumption, and also for the satisfaction of the infinite variety of needs and aspirations of a civilized being. In a society developed on these lines, voluntary associations, which already now begin to cover all the fields of human activity, would take a still greater extension so as to substitute themselves for the state in all its functions. They would represent an interwoven network composed of an infinite variety of groups and federations of all sizes and degrees, local, regional, national, and international, temporary, or more or less permanent, for all possible purposes: production, consumption and exchange, communications, sanitary arrangements, education, mutual protection, defense of the territory, and so on. And on the other side, for the satisfaction of an ever increasing number of scientific, artistic, literary, and sociable needs. Moreover, such a society would represent nothing immutable. On the contrary, as is seen in organic life at large, harmony would, it is contended, result from an ever changing adjustment and readjustment of equilibrium between the multitudes of forces and influences. And this adjustment would be the easier to obtain as none of the forces would enjoy special protection from the state. Kropotkin, 1910. Kropotkin's description summarizes the key principles of anarchism: direct opposition to the state and other formal structures of authority, an opposition to capitalism and the free market system, and a belief that the masses of people can manage their own affairs if given the freedom and opportunity. Guerin, 1970, Kropotkin, 2010. Anarchists believe that the social changes necessary for their vision of society to come to fruition will be achieved through revolution, necessary because uh, those who hold power will not relinquish it voluntarily. Anarchist praxis focuses on working to build models of social organization within the framework of the existing society and taking direct action against the state and other forms of authoritarianism. The anarchist opposition to the state comes from a belief that the state is tyrannical and authoritarian. As evidenced, anarchists present a litany of the state's abuses. To be governed is to be watched over, inspected, spied on, directed, legislated, regimented, closed on, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, assessed, evaluated, and censored, commanded, all by creatures that have neither the right nor wisdom nor virtue. To be governed means that at every move, operation, or transaction, one is noted, registered, entered into a census, taxed, stamped, priced, assessed, patented, licensed, authorized, recommended, admonished, prevented, reformed, set right, corrected. Government means to be subjected to tribute, trained, ransomed, exploited, monopolized, extorted, pressured, mystified, robbed, all in the name of public utility and and the general good. Then, at the first sign of resistance or word of complaint, one is repressed, fined, despised, vexed, pursued, hustled, beaten up, garroted, imprisoned, shot, machine gunned, judged, sentenced, deported, sacrificed, sold, betrayed, and to cap it all, ridiculed, mocked, outraged, and dishonored. That is government. That is its justices and its morality. Proudhon, quoted in Guerin, 1970. For anarchists, the state, no matter how liberal or democratic, can never act in the interest of the population. Daniel Guerin, 1970, describes the anarchist position on democracy as follows: the people were declared sovereign by a trick of our forefathers. The people rule but do not govern and delegate their sovereignty through the periodic exercise of universal suffrage, abdicating their power anew every 3 or 5 years. The dynasts have been driven from the throne, but the royal prerogative has been preserved intact. In the hands of a people whose education has been willfully neglected, the ballot is a cunning swindle benefiting only the united barons of industry, trade, and property. The state is seen as truly representing the interest of the powerful classes, or, in a worst case scenario, the interests simply of the people who comprise the organs of the state. Any affirmation of the state effectively takes control away from the individual and places it in the hands of an institution more powerful than the self. In the anarchist analysis, the state not only has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, but ultimately a monopoly on all behavior within its boundaries and will gladly repress and destroy any activity that it finds threatening. Because anarchists believe that the state serves only the interests of those who hold power economically, politically, and socially, they seek to create models of an anarchist society within the framework of the existing system. In this sense, anarchist ideology is predicated on constructing a prefigurative society to model the future. By taking direct action in relation to their lives, anarchists simultaneously reject the power of the state and other structures of power. Direct action becomes a form of praxis by applying anarchist principles in the here and now rather than engaging in slow processes of reform, which may or may not bring about the change that they desire. Anarchists have, therefore, been involved in social movements that are countercultural in their orientation or place a strong emphasis on prefigurative politics. Unfortunately, they are also seen as incapable of making compromises because their ideology has strict prohibitions against working within existing institutions, especially with the state. The focus on prefigurative action in anarchist ideology has developed into a preference for tactics that involve directly attacking the targets of their opposition. Taking direct action often places anarchists at odds with more moderate activists and with agents of the state. The direct action of anarchist praxis often focuses on process rather than a predetermined outcome or result. Anarchist philosophy views formal restrictions of bureaucracy, law, or religion as inherently oppressive to the expression of the individual. This is not to say that anarchists envision a world of Hobbesian chaos in place of the rule of law established by the state and carried out by its agents, read police. The anarchist vision of a society free of government and law ensures peace and social order by prioritizing core concepts of justice, fairness, and equality. Berkman, 1929. Farrell, 1998. Papinski, 1978. Tift, 1979. Such concepts reinforce the anarchist belief that the response to violence and other threats to social order cannot be developed in a universal manner because such threats occur. Instead, they posit that responses must occur after the violation in keeping with the needs of all parties involved, victims, perpetrators, and the community at large. In this sense, anarchists are more averse to the formal structures of law and the state than the informal codes of conduct or procedures necessary to maintain the safety of a community and its members. Such principles and practices serve as the basis for the development of an anarchist criminology. Anarchist ideology produces a unique perspective within the field of criminology because anarchism is predicated on the illegitimacy of the state and its actions. It informs a criminology that is fundamentally critical of the actions of the state as it attempts to maintain social order. Yet, anarchist criminologists are not content merely with challenging state practices of control and posit alternative forms of social organization as the solution to the problems presented in their critique. Anarchist criminologists present three key critiques of state action in the interest of crime prevention and control. First, the notion that the state has legitimate power over the lives of individuals. Second, the practices of construction and reinforcement of criminality through the creation and repression of criminal acts and identities. And thirdly, the criminal justice actions of the state perpetuated its legitimacy while being ineffective at actually preventing antisocial crime. As noted above, the state has an inordinate power over the life of every individual that is governed by it. This power is fully witnessed when an individual violates codified law. Tift notes that the state has exclusive power to appropriate the life and liberty of any individual who falls under its jurisdiction. When an individual violates the law, this appropriation often takes the form of imprisonment or, in extreme cases, death. In all cases, the state takes control of the life of the individual for its own ends. Even practices of victim restitution serve as a form of appropriation because when we compensate a victim of an appropriation by appropriating offender's resource, we merely increase the incidence of the appropriation. Tift, 1979. Such acts serve only to legitimize the appropriations enacted by the state and therefore its control over the individual. At least since the days of Durkheim in 1895, criminologists have understood crime as the construction of a particular society. Anarchists challenge the very notion that this practice is legitimate and necessary. By defining criminal and non-criminal alike, the state creates a downward spiral of crime, criminalization, and inhumanity. Farrell, 98. For those who have the misfortune of being criminalized and are alienated from the non-criminal population and become limited in terms of personal and professional development, which results in further crime and criminalization. Those who are not criminalized respond with fear and a greater demand for state intervention, thereby strengthening the power and control of the state and its estrangement from others. The clear beneficiary of such a dynamic is the state, which grows stronger in light of public demands for protection and an ever increasing rates of crime. As the state grows more powerful in response to demand for crime control, a vast bureaucratic structure is developed that further controls the daily lives of individuals through increasing surveillance and regulation. This structure is largely ineffective at reducing crime and acts of criminality, however. The growth of the state bureaucracy and the control of crime is evident in the ever increasing rates of criminal justice careers, institutions such as prisons, and individuals under the control of the criminal justice system. The growing bureaucracy is both the product and origin of a proliferation of legal controls that regulate and criminalize almost every single aspect of life. Farrell, 98, Tift, and Sullivan, 80. In the end, the state can never achieve its stated goals of crime prevention and control because its actions are ultimately contradictory and self-defeating. The rule of criminal law, as enacted by the state, requires swiftness, sureness, and severity. As the state acts to maximize one or two of these principles, however, it violates another. If the state acts quickly, then it is likely to violate due process or condemn an innocent person, violating the principle of sureness, and so on with the remaining principles. In the end, the state simply grows larger and more powerful without effectively controlling crime. While anarchists have been long on critique of the state and its role in the construction and control of crime, there has been little theoretical or practical development of alternatives to existing models of criminal justice. The notable exception to this claim has been a theoretical focus on restorative justice as an anarchist practice of resolution to criminal violations. The anarchist criminological vision of restorative justice involves needs-based approach to resolving the conflict that stems from harms created by criminal activity. This approach involves the meeting of needs of all parties involved, those being harmed, those who have harmed, and the community as a whole. The restorative justice process is designed to humanize the victims and perpetrators of crime and come to a resolution that meets the needs of all parties involved. It rejects a system of justice that is predicated on punishment and seeks to build a strong interpersonal relationships fundamental to a non-hierarchical society. Restorative justice also requires the community to be involved in the process and to rebuild in the wake of the harm that initiated it. This is a fundamentally anarchist approach because it critiques the existing form of justice and state action as well as offers a non-state, non-violent solution to the problem of social harm caused by criminal activity. In spite of this, there has been little scholarship on how anarchists can be proactive in dealing with questions of public order and safety as they occur. The existing work on anarchist attempts at, quote, policing, end quote, have focused on projects that seek to prevent or de-escalate conflict and confrontation through pacifist practice. Michael Nyman uses this case study of the Rainbow Family gatherings to point out critical models of anarchist pacifist intervention. He explains that the Rainbow gatherings use two distinct methods to ensure the safety of their participants: physical separation of violent and aggressive attendees into an A camp that is simultaneously a part of and apart from the Rainbow gathering, and the Shanti Sena practice of de-escalating aggression in the main camp. As an open event, the Rainbow Family Gathering does not turn away any participants. This structure draws individuals who may not be completely committed to the ideology and principles of the Rainbow Family. In order to accommodate these individuals and provide for the safety of the larger group, the Rainbow Gatherings create a space where participants can consume alcohol and engage in disruptive antics in a liminal space between the utopian pacifist main camp and Babylon. This is seen as a uniquely anarchist practice because it allows the participants in A camp a freedom to engage in whatever activities they choose, including activities that are not consistent with rainbow values and practices, without threatening the integrity of the camp as a whole, while at the same time affording them the opportunity to participate in the rainbow experience in the anarchist spirit of openness and direct democracy. In addition to this practice of separation, Rainbow participants engage in a practice of de-escalation that they refer to as Shanti Sena or Peace Center. This practice involves Rainbow participants surrounding a fellow participant who is becoming agitated and aggressive and encouraging her or him to de-escalate through smiles and eye contact as well as friendly touch when appropriate. When such efforts are not enough, participants engage in the practice of creating an Om circle, or oming, where aggressive individual is encircled by a group of people who chant the harmonic syllable mm. This practice is generally effective in de-escalating aggression and potential violence because the individual being encircled is committed to the pacifist principles of the group. Farrell has presented similar practice among bicycle activists engaged in critical mass protest, a practice known as corking, whereby participating cyclists will break off from the main group in order to act as traffic police and de-escalate potential conflicts with motorists and bystanders. Both of these practices demonstrate anarchist principles in mass, voluntary participation, because the individuals intervening are doing so on a voluntary basis and have not been singled out to engage in the activity. The people engaging in such practices are neither elected nor selected and come from the group based on a personal desire to intervene and take action. These people are also given no special power or authority by virtue of their position in the practice of oming or corking, and any participant is free to engage in this action. While these models have been effective at preventing or de-escalating conflict, they do not provide anarchists with a model for voluntary, direct democratic processes to confront violence or threats of violence. The peaceful tactics described above are effective largely because they are geared toward individuals who share the same values of the group or are not directly hostile and ideologically committed to engaging in violence. Anti-fascists, however, are confronting individuals who thrive on violence and adhere to an ideology that valorizes its use against opponents. By challenging fascists through direct confrontation, even violence, militant anti-fascists engage in a form of anarchist praxis. Rather than relying on police or the state to take action in defense of a community against fascist threats, militants organize themselves and their community to take on the threat. This is the result of direct hostility to police and other agents of the state that stems from a belief that they represent the interests of power rather than the interests of the people. Consistent with anarchist perspectives, militants therefore blatantly display a disrespect for existing laws and legal structures as products of systems of power. Finally, militant activity ultimately represents a form of non-state action against fascists and models a form of self-defense that is in some ways prefigurative of anarchist community defense. That is the end of part one. Part 2, fascist and anti-fascist, should already be uploaded by the time that you're watching this. Otherwise, it'll be up soon. Please like and share. I want to make new ideas accessible to people as possible, and we can do that together. Thank you.